Did you know that the lake bordering Chicago's most famous shoreline has killed more than 1,300 people since 2010, and that the currents responsible move faster than any Olympic swimmer who has ever competed? Or that the ground beneath Chicago's most iconic skyscrapers is currently sinking, slowly but without stopping, because underground heat from subway tunnels and parking garages has warmed the city's clay foundation by 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and no building in the city was designed to withstand it? Chicago sits at the intersection of the most dangerous geography in the Midwest and the most persistent myth in American urban history. It is a city built on a drained swamp, bordered by a lake the Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project calls the deadliest body of water in the United States. Most people look at Chicago's lakefront and see a postcard. Nobody tells them what the lake has been doing to people who thought the same thing. So settle in, because we are counting down 25 most dangerous facts about Chicago that will completely change how you see the Windy City. Stick around to the very end, because what we saved for last is documented, devastating, and has never been fully explained. Coming in at number 25, the lake that runs faster than you. Here is what nobody teaches you about Lake Michigan. It is not a beach. It is the deadliest body of water in the United States, and the evidence is in the numbers. The Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project, which maintains the definitive database for all 5 Great Lakes, has documented more than 1,300 drownings in Lake Michigan since 2010 alone. In 2020, the record year, 53 people drowned, more than the other 4 Great Lakes combined. The National Weather Service classifies rip currents at 2 miles per hour as dangerous. Lake Michigan rip currents have been measured exceeding 5 miles per hour, the fastest sustained speed any Olympic swimmer can maintain over distance is roughly 2 miles per hour. Michigan Sea Grant documents 5 distinct lethal current types in the lake. 4 of them require weather to form. The 5th, structural currents at piers and breakwalls, requires nothing. It is simply there. The ocean has centuries of lifeguard culture built around its dangers. Lake Michigan has a Chicago Park District sign. In 2020, the sign was not enough. At number 24, the river that runs the wrong way. Here is what Hollywood never told you about the Panama Canal. The engineers who built it learned the job in Chicago first. On January 2, 1900, workers quietly removed the final barrier between the Chicago River and the newly completed Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. In the middle of the night, in winter, because city engineers had received word that a lawsuit to stop the project might be filed at dawn. By sunrise, the Chicago River was flowing backward. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago confirms it has not stopped since. The project employed more than 15,000 workers at peak construction, more than the Panama Canal at the same period, and the earth-moving machines and engineering methods developed during it were exported directly to Panama. Chicago reversed a river before the world dug a canal between 2 oceans. It did it under cover of darkness to avoid a court injunction. Every St. Patrick's Day, Chicago dyes that river green. It has been running backward for more than 125 years, and it doesn't seem to mind. Landing at number 23, the world's largest drain. By the 1960s, Chicago's sewers were overflowing into the Chicago River more than 100 days per year. Raw sewage into the drainage basin of a city that draws its drinking water from a lake. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago adopted the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, TARP, in 1972. The solution was to dig deeper than the problem. 4 tunnel networks totaling 110 miles, ranging from 8 to 33 feet in diameter, wide enough to drive a semi-truck through, drilled 150 to 300 feet underground into limestone bedrock. The MWRD describes as 400 million years old. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers oversaw key construction phases. According to the MWRD, the system has captured more than 1 trillion gallons of combined sewage and stormwater since becoming operational. 300 feet below street level, in rock that formed before the age of dinosaurs, a machine that has taken 50 years to build is quietly keeping Chicago from drowning in its own infrastructure. The full system is not projected to be complete until 2032. Coming in at number 22, the disaster nobody remembers. Here's what Hollywood never told you about the Titanic disaster. In Chicago, the safety laws it produced made things worse. On July 24, 1915, the passenger steamer SS Eastland rolled over while still tied to its dock in the Chicago River. Its bow, 19 feet from the wharf, in 20 feet of water, and killed 844 people. The Eastland Disaster Historical Society holds the primary archive. This is the largest loss of life from a single shipwreck in Great Lakes history, 7 times the official death toll of the Great Chicago Fire, in a river that runs through the Loop. On a Tuesday morning in July, 22 entire families were completely wiped out. The cause was the ship's chronic top heaviness, worsened critically by the addition of 11 lifeboats and 37 life rafts to its upper deck, required by the Federal Seamen's Act, passed directly in response to the Titanic disaster 3 years earlier. The U.S. Coast Guard Trident Maritime History confirms no one was ever held criminally responsible. All lawsuits were dismissed. I have read every documented account of that morning in the Chicago River, and the detail I cannot stop turning over is this: the boat never moved, never left the dock. Its bow was 19 feet from the wharf when 844 people drowned inside it. The safety law that Titanic forced into existence killed them. Nobody made a movie about it. Fact 21, the cow didn't do it. After the Great Chicago Fire burned October 8th through 10th, 1871, destroying 3 1/3 square miles, killing an estimated 300 people, leaving 100,000 homeless, reporter Michael Ahern of the Chicago Republican published the story of Catherine O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern in the barn on DeKoven Street. The Board of Police and Fire Commissioners collected more than 1,100 pages of handwritten testimony. According to the Chicago History Museum, which holds the investigation records, and the University of Chicago Press scholarship on the event, the board concluded the fire started in the O'Leary barn and could not determine how or by whom. O'Leary testified she was asleep when it started. Her neighbor, Daniel Sullivan, the first to report the fire, confirmed her alibi. Ahern later admitted he invented the cow detail to make his article more interesting. In 1997, 126 years later, the Chicago City Council formally exonerated Catherine O'Leary. The most famous origin story in Chicago history was invented by a newspaper reporter. The cause of the Great Chicago Fire remains officially undetermined. At number 20, the secret railroad. In 1902, city officials in Chicago discovered that a private company had been quietly digging an unauthorized underground railroad beneath the loop since 1899. The Illinois Telephone and Telegraph Company had received permission to lay telephone cables. Instead, as transit historian Bruce Moffett documented for WTHW Chicago and the Chicago History Museum, it built 62 miles of tunnels 40 feet below street level, large enough for electric freight cars delivering coal, mail, and merchandise to the sub-basements of City Hall, Marshall Fields, the Merchandise Mart, and dozens of other buildings. The tunnels followed the city's street grid exactly, meaning that to this day, a standard Chicago street map is a functional navigation chart for the underground network. The system ran for decades, was gradually forgotten, and became the most expensive infrastructure failure in Chicago's peacetime history. We are not at that part of the story yet. A private company built 62 miles of underground railroad beneath a major American city, ran freight through it for decades, and the city forgot it existed until the river found it. If an entire railroad can disappear beneath Chicago, consider how easy it would be to miss what this channel puts out. Hit subscribe. It is free, it is above ground, and unlike the Chicago Loop in 1992, this will not cost you $1 billion. Coming in at number 19, the deadliest water in America. The water safety. Task Force Metro Chicago states it directly. Lake Michigan is the most deadly body of water in the United States. 55 million tourists visit Chicago's lakefront annually. 46% of Chicago children have not had swimming lessons. In 2025, 36 people drowned in the lake. In 2024, 37. In 2020, the record 53 more that year than any other body of water in the country. Most of the dead are not tourists. They are Chicagoans who grew up within walking distance of the water and did not know enough about its geography to stay alive in it. The most photographed urban waterfront in the United States is also the most dangerous stretch of freshwater in the country. That information is not in the promotional materials. Fact 18. The inland tsunami. On June 26, 1954, at approximately 9:30 in the morning, a wall of water between 8 and 10 feet tall swept across Montrose Harbor and North Avenue Pier in Chicago without warning. 7 fishermen were pulled from Montrose Harbor into the lake. An 8th was swept from North Avenue Beach. All 8 drowned. No storm was visible from shore. The morning was calm. NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory in Ann Arbor, Michigan, later classified the event as a meteotsunami, driven not by seismic activity, but by atmospheric pressure, changes created by thunderstorms racing across Wisconsin at approximately 55 miles per hour. The pressure wave reached the Chicago shoreline before the storms themselves arrived. The NOAA Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory confirms meteotsunamis on Lake Michigan remain a documented, recurring, and unscheduled risk. A July 2025 event produced a 1-foot water level rise at Calumet Harbor in under 3 hours with no preceding warning at all. 8 feet of water is taller than the interior ceiling of most American homes. The lake does not need a storm to produce it. It needs the right pressure system moving at the right speed across Wisconsin. And number 17, the most contaminated neighborhood in North America. By the 1980s, 90% of all landfills in the city of Chicago were concentrated on the southeast side, in the Calumet Industrial District. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency formally declared the Calumet region the largest concentration of waste in North America. 51 landfills, 423 hazardous waste sites. 3 EPA Superfund sites remain active in the area today. The Lake Calumet Cluster, approximately 90 acres near 122nd Street and Stony Island Avenue. The Shroud property, nearly 70 contaminated acres near 126th Street and Avenue O, and the Acme Steel Coke plant, added to the federal Superfund priority list in March 2024. A University of Illinois Chicago analysis identified more than 460 toxic brownfield sites across southeast Chicago and southern Cook County. The old local expression, "If there is soot on the windows, there is food on the table." I have read the history of what this neighborhood was asked to absorb for the rest of Chicago. The neighborhood that provided the steel for more than 40% of Chicago's skyline was left with the largest concentration of industrial waste in North America. The skyline is on every postcard. The neighborhood is not. And before we continue, in 1903, a building on West Randolph Street in the Loop was certified absolutely fireproof by Chicago's own building inspector. It had been open 5 weeks. 602 people were inside when it stopped being fireproof. Keep it with you. Coming in at number 16, the Army that dumps in the lake. Since 1984, the United States Army Corps of Engineers has been depositing toxic sediment dredged from the Calumet River and the Cal-Sag Channel, sediment containing mercury, arsenic, and polychlorinated biphenyls, into a 45-acre containment site on the Lake Michigan shoreline on Chicago's southeast side. Under a 1982 agreement brokered by Illinois state lawmakers, the site was to be capped and converted into an extension of adjacent Calumet Park once filled. That did not happen. The Army Corps sought to continue operations and expand the site by 25 additional feet. As of a 2023 federal lawsuit filed by the Environmental Law and Policy Center, the only barrier between the toxic sediment and the park where neighborhood children swim is a chain-link fence. The Illinois EPA filed a court document in 2025 opposing the expansion, stating it would violate state law. The litigation is ongoing. The same federal agency that manages Chicago's flood tunnels has been depositing mercury and arsenic on the Lake Michigan shoreline for 40 years. on land legally designated to be a public park more than 2 decades ago. Fact 15. The underground city that flooded in daylight. In September of 1991, a construction crew driving pilings near the Kinzie Street Bridge unknowingly punctured the roof of the freight tunnel network beneath the Chicago River. The crack widened through the winter. The city received a written warning about the breach. The city did not act on it. At 6 in the morning on April 13, 1992, the tunnel wall failed. A whirlpool appeared in the Chicago River at Kinzie Street. Within hours, 250 million gallons of river water, enough to fill 379 Olympic swimming pools, were flooding 62 miles of unauthorized tunnels 40 feet below the loop, entering sub-basements across downtown. Fish were swimming in the basement of the merchandise mart. The loop shut down completely for 2 days. Total damage, per the Chicago Tribune's 30th anniversary reporting, reached between $1 and $2 billion. The Chicago Community Trust called it an eerie hidden disaster. A billion-dollar catastrophe unfolding entirely underground on a clear spring morning while commuters walked dry streets above it. The most expensive peacetime disaster in Chicago's history happened because a city forgot about 62 miles of railroad it hadn't built, and nobody checked on it. At number 14, the street that floods. Lakeshore Drive runs 15 miles along Chicago's lakefront, the road the city built to celebrate its greatest geographic asset. In January of 2020, the National Weather Service documented waves of up to 20 feet striking the lakefront. Lakeshore Drive was temporarily closed, and emergency personnel conducted multiple rescues. The National Weather Service issues lakeshore flood advisories for Chicago multiple times each year, a category distinct from inland flood warnings, warning of waves between 12 and 16 feet, combining with above-average lake levels to produce what the NWS formally classifies as extremely dangerous conditions. NOAA and the Army Corps of Engineers monitor Lake Michigan's multi-year water level cycles continuously. High lake level years amplify every hazard on this list simultaneously. Lakeshore Drive is named after a lake. The lake occasionally returns the compliment. Coming in at number 13, the nickname, "That's a Lie." Chicago is called the Windy City. The standard explanation is Lake Michigan winds. Here is what nobody taught you. The dominant documented origin of that nickname has nothing to do with meteorology. Historian Barry Popick and other scholars have traced the term to Chicago's relentless, self-promotional campaign to host the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, a campaign so loud that a New York Sun editor reportedly dismissed the city as politically windy. What is genuinely true is that the loop functions as a literal wind tunnel. The National Weather Service documents wind speed differences of up to 20 degrees between different Chicago neighborhoods because grid-patterned street canyons channel and accelerate prevailing winds between skyscrapers. In February of 1988, the Willis Tower shed multiple sheets of glass in winds reaching 70 miles per hour. The windows soared as far as a block away before hitting the street. Chicago is called the Windy City because a New York editor was annoyed by its politicians in 1890. The wind that actually kills people here comes off a lake that is 307 miles long. Fact 12, the depth below the postcard. Lake Michigan reaches a maximum depth of 925 feet. The Willis Tower rises 1,127 feet to its roof. Not its antenna, its roof. The lake next to Chicago's skyline is deep enough to submerge a building 80 stories tall and still have the roofline below the surface. Michigan Sea Grant documents a drowning mechanism that has no ocean equivalent. Cold water rising from depth creates sudden temperature drops near the surface that are invisible from shore. A swimmer who crosses a thermocline can experience involuntary cold shock breathing, an automatic gasping reflex triggered at the worst possible moment. Layer on top of that what the National Weather Service documents about Lake Michigan wave succession. Waves arriving every 2 seconds, compared to the 7 to 10 second intervals of typical ocean swells. A swimmer knocked off their feet has 2 seconds to find their orientation before the next wave arrives. The tourists on the beach don't know how far down it goes. At number 11, the week Chicago stopped breathing. From July 12th through July 20th, 1995, a heat wave killed 739 people in Chicago, more in 7 days than died in the Great Chicago Fire, the Eastland disaster, or the Iroquois Theater Fire. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in its official Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, documented that on July 13, 1995, the heat index peaked at 119 degrees Fahrenheit, a record for the city. Cook County Medical Examiner Edmund Donahue's office received 17 bodies on an average night that summer. On July 14th alone, it received 87. The office ran out of refrigeration capacity and requested refrigerated trucks from the state of Illinois to store the overflow. 73% of the dead were over 65. More than half lived on the west and south sides. Most died alone, behind locked doors and sealed windows, protecting their apartments from crime while the city cooked around them. Sociologist Eric Kleinenberg, in Heat Wave, A Social Autopsy of Disaster in Chicago, published by the University of Chicago Press in 2002, documented that the city had a heat emergency plan on file. According to Kleinenberg, they never activated it. The mayor was on vacation. The health commissioner was on vacation. 739 people died from hot air in a modern American city that had a plan and chose not to open it. Stay with this video. There is one more story. One building, one afternoon, 15 minutes. And when we get to it, you are going to understand that Chicago's relationship with institutional failure is not a modern problem. It is the oldest story this city has. Coming in at number 10, the city built on what used to be there. Chicago sits at an elevation of roughly 585 to 673 feet above sea level, low, flat, barely above the lake. Before development, the land was a marshy wetland system functioning as a natural stormwater absorber. According to environmental reporting in the new lead, 40% of Chicago's wetlands have disappeared since 1900, drained in large part as a direct consequence of the Chicago River reversal, which redirected the water flows that fed them. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago has spent more than $3 billion and 50 years building tarp to approximate what those wetlands did for free, and it will not be complete until 2032. The geology beneath the city is glacially deposited clay and till, the same clay that Northwestern University's 2023 study confirmed is sensitive to underground heating and currently deforming under the weight of the loop. Chicago drained the swamp it was built on, spent $3 billion, replacing what the swamp did for free, and is still paying for it. Fact 9. The ground that is moving. In July of 2023, Northwestern University Assistant Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering Alessandro Rada Loria published findings in Communications Engineering, a Nature portfolio journal, establishing the first documented link between underground heat and ground deformation beneath a major city. Rada Loria's team installed more than 150 wireless temperature sensors across Chicago's loop, in subway tunnels, parking garages, building basements, and beneath streets like Lower Wacker Drive, and collected 3 years of data. Underground temperatures beneath the loop run up to 18 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than temperatures below Grant Park, directly across the street. The cause? Continuous heat from underground infrastructure. The effect? Chicago's clay foundation is contracting and expanding continuously, and building foundations across the loop are undergoing what Rada Loria described as unwanted settlement, slowly but continuously. The ground can rise by as much as 12 millimeters in some areas and sink by as much as 8 millimeters beneath building weight. Underground climate change is a silent hazard, Rada Loria stated in Northwestern's press release. The ground is deforming as a result of temperature variations, and no existing civil structure or infrastructure is designed to withstand these variations. The ground beneath Chicago's most famous skyline is moving, and every building on top of it was designed for a world where it stayed still. At number 8, the pier that kills. Michigan Sea. Grant classifies 5 lethal current types on Lake Michigan. 4 require weather conditions to form. 1 does not. Structural currents form permanently around every pier, breakwall, and jetty on the Chicago shoreline. They were there the day each structure was built, and they will be there the day each structure comes down. The Chicago Park District explicitly prohibits swimming near piers and breakwalls because of this permanent danger. NOAA documents that swimmers near lake structures are statistically more likely to drown than swimmers in open water. The mechanism? A swimmer who enters the water near a pier is immediately in a current running along the structure's face. Swimming back to the wall is not possible against it. Crossing to open water requires fighting it. On a calm day, with the lake surface flat and the sky clear, structural currents are completely invisible. There is no weather forecast for them. The most dangerous current at any Chicago pier is not caused by the weather. It is caused by the pier. Coming in at number 7, the urban oven. A 2023 Climate Central analysis of 44 American cities found that approximately 12% of Chicago's residents live in areas where the urban heat island effect elevates local temperatures by at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit above the city's base temperature, making Chicago third nationally for the share of its population living in extreme urban heat zones, behind only New York and San Francisco. NOAA formally partnered with Chicago in 2023 to map temperature hotspots through its Heat Watch campaign. Northwestern University professor Daniel Horton, a founding member of the Midwest Climate Collaborative, has described how Chicago's above-ground heat island, underground heat island, and Lake Michigan's cooling effect create what he calls disparate environmental stressors across different neighborhoods. The National Weather Service documents mid-afternoon temperatures reaching 15 to 20 degrees above surrounding vegetated areas in the most heat-absorbing parts of the city. On a 90-degree day in Chicago, residents of the most heat-exposed west and south side neighborhoods are experiencing something equivalent to 110 degrees. Residents of lakefront neighborhoods 3 miles away may be at 90. The geography of Chicago's heat does not match its zip codes. It matches its history of infrastructure investment. Those are 2 different maps. Fact 6. The lake that makes its own weather. Lake Michigan generates its own regional meteorological system. The temperature differential between the lake surface and the surrounding city creates lake breezes, onshore winds driven by thermal contrast, that can drop lakefront temperatures by up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit within a quarter mile of shore. NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory documents a specific hazard this creates: rapid onset dangerous conditions with none of the visual warning signals ocean swimmers would recognize. No horizon darkening, no change in swell direction. A clear and calm lake morning can become a life-threatening wave environment in under 30 minutes. The National Weather Service notes that Lake Michigan waves arrive every 2 seconds, compared to 7 to 10 second intervals for typical ocean swells. A swimmer knocked down at the ocean has several seconds to recover their orientation. A swimmer knocked down in Lake Michigan has 2. The lake that cools Chicago's lakefront on the hottest summer day generates the conditions that kill swimmers within the hour. It does both at the same time. At number 5, the cold that kills from below. NOAA and Michigan Sea Grant document a thermal drowning mechanism in Lake Michigan that has no equivalent at ocean beaches. Cold water rising from the lake's lower depths creates sudden temperature drops near the surface that are not visible from shore and are not predicted by wind or wave forecasts. A swimmer who moves from the warmer surface layer into the cold thermocline can experience involuntary cold shock breathing, an automatic gasping reflex triggered by rapid skin temperature change, causing inhalation at the worst possible moment. The Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project has documented this mechanism in its analysis of Great Lakes drowning patterns. The thermal layering is invisible from shore. It is not seasonal in the way people expect. It is present on days when the surface looks inviting, and the National Weather Service has issued no warnings. It was present at North Avenue Beach and Montrose Harbor and Oak Street Beach, and every other stretch of Chicago's lakefront today. The lake looks warm at the surface. Below a certain depth, it is cold enough to trigger an involuntary drowning reflex in a strong swimmer before they understand what is happening. Coming in at number 4, the building that could not burn. The building is on West Randolph Street. Today, it is called the CIBC Theater. You can look up shows scheduled there this weekend. The alley directly behind it is called Couch Place on any current Chicago street map. On December 30th, 1903, newspapers had a different name for it. More than 200 bodies were stacked in that alley before noon. The fire that put them there lasted 15 minutes. The building did not burn down. The city renamed the theater. Not one person connected to the deaths was ever convicted. 602 people, 15 minutes, absolutely fireproof. We are almost there. Fact 3, the alley they named for the dead. Couch Place runs between Lake and Randolph Streets, east of State Street in Chicago's Loop. CBS Chicago has documented in multiple features on the history of this site that after December 30th, 1903, the alley was immediately and universally renamed Death's Alley by the city's newspapers. Rescuers had carried bodies through the theater's emergency exits, which emptied into it, and stacked them there because there was nowhere else to put them. More than 200 before the fire was completely out. The Iroquois Theater building was repaired, reopened as the Colonial Theater, demolished in 1925, replaced by the Oriental Theater in 1926, closed in 1981, restored, and reopened in 1998. Today, it is the CIBC Theater with performances scheduled regularly. CBS Chicago has reported multiple documented accounts of apparitions and unexplained sounds in the alley from paranormal researchers and ghost tour operators over the decades since. The alley still exists. It still carries the geometry of that morning. The theater took a new name. The alley did not. And number 2, the river that carries everything. The Chicago River threads through every major geography-linked catastrophe in the city's documented history. In 1900, its reversal saved Chicago from dying of its own sewage. In 1915, 844 people drowned inside it 20 feet from the bank. In 1992, 250 million gallons of its water destroyed the city's underground infrastructure and cost up to $2 billion. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago manages the river today through 7 water reclamation plants. It runs 156 miles through the metropolitan area. It passes through the Loop. It flows backward, away from the lake, as it has since January 2, 1900. Every building in the Loop sits above the drainage basin that connects to it. Every St. Patrick's Day, Chicago dyes the river green. It has been running backward for more than a century. It has killed more people in the downtown Loop than almost anything else on this list. It does not seem to mind. And finally, number 1, the Fireproof Building. On November 23, 1903, the Iroquois Theater opened at 24 to 28 West Randolph Street in Chicago's Loop. Its promotional materials called it absolutely fireproof. Its architect, Benjamin Marshall, called it the most beautiful theater in Chicago. Building Commissioner George Williams and Fire Inspector Edward Laughlin had conducted a pre-opening inspection and agreed, fireproof, beyond all doubt. A Chicago Fire Department captain had separately identified multiple code violations, unmarked emergency exits, no sprinkler system, a safety curtain that had never been properly certified. He filed a report. According to contemporaneous accounts, a fire warden told him the syndicate owning the building would have him fired if he pressed the issue. Nothing was changed. 5 weeks later, December 30th, 1903, 3:15 in the afternoon, more than 2,000 people in a theater designed for 1602 for a sold-out holiday matinee of the musical comedy Mr. Bluebeard, starring Eddie Foy, now one of the most famous entertainers in America. A backstage arc light shorted out and ignited a muslin curtain. Fire moved through the flies to the hanging scenery. A fireball traveled from the stage area toward the rear balconies. The Iroquois Theater had an asbestos safety curtain designed specifically to seal the stage off from the audience and contain any backstage fire. It began to lower. It stopped 6 feet above the stage floor. Nobody then, and nobody since, has established definitively why. The gap was the size of a door. The fireball passed through it. Stage crew fled backstage, feeding fresh air into the fire. The theater had more than 30 exit doors. Many were unlocked, but concealed behind heavy drapes. Several were fitted with European-style bascule latches that panicked American audiences could not operate under pressure. Some doors opened inward against the direction of the crush. The fire was out within 15 minutes. Chicago firefighters arrived and found no fire to fight, only the dead. 602 people died. 250 more were injured. More than 200 bodies were carried to the alley behind the theater, Couch Place, which newspapers named Death's Alley the following morning. Among the dead were scores of children. Eddie Foy survived. He had tried to calm the audience from the stage before he fled. A grand jury indicted 5 individuals: theater owners Will Davis and Thomas Noonan, stage manager James Cummings, building commissioner George Williams, and fire inspector Edward Laughlin. Evidence presented suggested city inspectors had accepted complimentary theater tickets in exchange for overlooking the code violations. The defense successfully argued that Chicago's fire ordinances were technically invalid as written. Judge Joseph Eberhardt dismissed all charges. Not one person was ever convicted of any crime in connection with 602 deaths. I have read the investigation transcripts, the inquest records, and the grand jury testimony, and I cannot tell you why the asbestos curtain stopped 6 feet above the stage floor. Nobody can. That gap was never definitively explained. It was the size of a door, and 602 people died because it was there. The theater was repaired, reopened as the Colonial Theater, demolished in 1925. The Oriental Theater opened on the site in 1926, closed in 1981, was restored and reopened in 1998. Today it operates as the CIBC Theater with performances scheduled regularly. The alley behind it, Couch Place, between Lake and Randolph Streets, is still there. 602 people went to a comedy on a cold December afternoon. The fire was out in 15 minutes. The building did not burn down. Nobody went to prison. You can see a show there tonight. The alley is still called Couch Place on the map. Newspapers called it something else.